So we saw that today, to understand the Indian, we saw there were two oifanim of hisavas, of coming into being, of entities or oilamas or spheres, and that was what we saw, Gilui Ahelem, and the other was even from Yesh Mi'ayin. And we saw that Gilui Ahelem was really just Amshocha B'derech Seida V'Hadroga, that what was Lamaila in a higher state just came down and revealed itself B'derech Seida V'Hadroga, almost what we might call Ileva Olu. It comes down and reveals itself in a lower madrega. Gilui, revelation of the Helem, or that which was hidden in a higher darga. Aber ein bezesh chadches, it's not a really new isgalas. It's not what we call a gilui chodosh, or to use the expression, his chadshus, a new entity that's come into being, because it was really there in a higher state, but it came down, but Yerida B'Seidav Hadrog, as we pointed out. The Ilo De'in for Yesh Mi'ayin, we saw that Yesh Mi'ayin is that the Yesh which comes from the Ayin has no connection cloud with the Ayin from which it comes, and it comes B'Derech Dilug, jumping of the Madrigas altogether in a way that there's no open connection between the Yesh and the Ayin which brought it the Ayin which brought it about. And that's what we call a Gilui Shaloba Hadrogya. In other words, a Gilui which is Ein Aroich. It has no comparison one to the other. And Derech Agav, that's the way the whole Yesh Agashmi comes into being from Elikus in an even for Yesh Mi'ayin, but that's what a tremendous inyan in the Yesh Mi'ayin, which is called in the Sifrei HaChoikrim, it's called Ein L'cho Yesh Mi'ayin Godel Mizeh. That's the most extreme example of Yesh Mi'ayin. However, we find that these inyanim in the Shorsh HaRishon, that is Galas Elikus, how it led to the coming about of the Elamas, there's also two such gradations, or inyanim, Ayin from Gila Helem and Ayin from Yesh Mi'ayin. And we saw that the Inyan from the Esa Spheres, the Atzilas, are at the moment our particular concern. Now everybody's familiar with the fact that the word Atzilus is not yet a created world. The three created worlds are Bria, Yetzira, Vasiya, but they come about after Malchus Atzilas. In other words, after the soft madregas of Olam Atzilas, then we have the three created worlds. And the three created worlds are Brio, Yesh Mi'ayin, Mamish. Like we said, that the Ika Yesh Mi'ayin is Davke Bo'elam Hazeh. Mashenkin, the world Atzilus per se, well, that's only Inyan of Gilui Elikus, purely Chas V'Sholem, Ein B'Zeh Inyan Shel Yesh, or Brio, Yesh Mi'ayin. And therefore, the point being made here at the beginning of this Maimah is that Atzilus is really what we call Giluya Ahelem. The Esa Spheres, how they are in Atzilus, what albeit they're the Shoyresh of all the Inyanim of Esa Spheres and all the elements which are to come, or they came about in a Eifan that they misgala from a higher state, where they were in a state of higher Iskalilus in Elikus, and they just came down B'derech Hadroga and were miskala in Olam HaAtzilas. And then after the Inyan from Olam HaAtzilas, Sofoi, at the end of Olam HaAtzilas, in Malchus, there's a koyach which produces the Gimel Olamas Bria Yetzira Vasiya B'derech Yesh Mi'ayin. So we're saying that Inyan in the Esa Spheres, the Atzilas, which is still Elikus, well, that's called Odom. And we saw that the word Odom can also be touched in two Oifanim, or two Drochim. Aleph, the Etzeminian of Odom, by definition, is a series of interrelated madrigas, like we have by the mention itself. The dimension is a combination of a whole series of interrelated and interfunctioning madrigas. And then we saw that the word Odom can also be based on the Pasuk in Yeshaya Novi, in which it was written about Melech Bavel, Adameh Elyoin, I will compare myself to the Most High. meaning that the word Odom also has the idea of comparison to something which is incomparably higher than it, but nonetheless a comparison. So, berega that you say Adamele Elyoin, I will be compared to the High One, well, that means there's some basis of comparison, that you're comparing this to this, means that they have some sort of a erech one to the other. Mashiach, we pointed out, if we're talking Yesh Mi'ayin, then Yesh Mi'ayin has no erech of one to the other. So if we're going to say then that Atzilus is called Odom for those two reasons, first of all, it has in itself the inif and Eser Spheres, and those Eser Spheres are interrelated madrigas. And the second and Ika reason, what we're concerned with here, is that Adamer Elyoin is compared to the most high. Then we have to find in what way is Atzilus compared to the most high. In other words, what madriga does it come from? And if we're saying it's compared to the Most High, then it must be even from Gilui HaHelem, because they're two levels which have a certain comparison, one to the other. That's the union of Gilui HaHelem. So therefore we wanted to establish that was in two madrigas or two oifanim. That we could say that Atzilus was Adamele Elyoin, it was Gilui HaHelem, and therefore compared in a clolistic way to the higher madrega from which it came, to a madrega called Ak, and then to what we call Klolos Hakav. Ak and Klolos Hakav. And so we pointed out in the diagrams and things that we drew the other night that Ak was the first Gilui of Oilamas after the Tzimtzum Harishon. And the first appearance after the Tzimtzum Harishon is called Odom Kadmon. And we said it's not customary in Lubavitch to keep repeating that phrase. The two words Odom and Kadmon are expressed by the abbreviation Ak. But however, if we examine each of them, we see that the word Odom once again comes in. Odom meaning the idea of interrelated levels. And the Inifer Kadmon means primordial. Well, that means it's got some connection still with the primordial light, meaning the unlimited light that was there prior to the Tzimtzum. So that's the union of Ak, which is a form of almost what you might call a paradox, that on the one hand it's already Odom, meaning madrigas and interrelated madrigas, which are not shaykh in the Shalifnei Atim, the Aposhut, which was there prior to the Tzimtzum. However, we say that they still have in themselves a certain trace of the unlimitedness that they had prior to the Tzimtzum, and therefore they're called Kadmon. But the truth of the matter is that the word Kadmon is really a borrowed word in that regard, because you can't really say it's Kadmon in the Emes sense, because there's already been the Tzimtzum Harishon, and the Tzimtzum Harishon has already brought limitation into everything. And therefore we can't really say Kadmon in the Emes sense, but we call them Kadmon because they're still so entwined and bottled inside the divine light that they're not separate identifiable entities. And therefore the Eser Spheres they are in Ak, are what we call Betachlis Pshitas Vaiskalalas, that they have no real revealed entity yet, but they're potentially there. And potentially in the sense that they really have a form of existence. And therefore it's Atzilus is only like a series of derivations from that level, which they go from Darga to Darga, through which the spheres come out in more detail and they gradually reveal themselves in a more tangible way, and therefore Atzilus is called Adamele Elyoin Legabi Ak. So that's one thing. And then he said there's another inyan, that it's also Adamele Elyoin Legabi de Klolos Hakav. And we drew you the diagram, we showed you that after the Tzimtzum, which was a inifant siluk, a removal of the divine light, the Eibishter brought into that vacuum that he'd made, Kaviochel, he brought into that a limited line form of revelation, which is called the Kav. Now that Kav, as we saw in the diagram that we drew, that is linked and Nogea, it touches the circle which indicates the infinite divine light prior to the Tzimtzum. So it's connected, it's linked with the Shalifnei Tzimtzum, but it goes down in the form of a limited, tremendously limited form of revelation. It can be called a line, and it only goes down into the Mokum Panui, into the vacuum. It doesn't actually touch the other edge, because if it did, then it would be just Niklal and bottle in the whole Indian of the Habilti Gvul. And that's the Indian of the Kav. Now the Kav is the first appearance after the Tzimtzum, and all of the other Gilumim which occur in all the Eilamas develop one way or another from the Kav. And what he means by the expression Klolos HaKav, he means the first Gilu of the Kav, even before it gives rise to Adam Kav Ach, which we just mentioned before, which is the first, Hisav is the first coming about after the Tzimtzum. But there's a Gilu of the Kav, how it is even before it begins that. And that's what we call the union of Atik Sheba Ak, or that's upon him, the Klolos HaKav, the generality of the whole idea of a limited light, which is first appearance is being made from the Oyer HaBilti Gvul, the Oyer HaBilti Gvul, how it is immediately after the Tzimtzum, and that's called Klolos HaKav. So the Rebbe says that the Indian from Atzilas, the Esser spirits, that they come out into identify Gilui in Olam Atzilas, they're also Adamel Elyoin, they're also compared to the Klolos of the Kav. Now, why would we say that? The Klolos HaKav is even higher than Ach, as we just pointed out. Because we want to say, in the previous Maimon, the Rebbe explained, that the Indian of the Kav, albeit it's connected and linked with the Ur HaKlali, with the Ur HaBilti Gvul, but it goes through the Tzimtzum, and it's nimshach only al yidei, what you might call the effect of the Tzimtzum. And therefore the Kav in Be'etzem Inyona, as you might call it, in the very essence of its makeup, the Kav is already Gvul. It's already the Ur how it's become Mugbal al yidei the Tzimtzum, which is the Koyach HaGvul B'lavochi, even though it's Nogeya and it touches the Ur HaBli, and it's nimshach from the Ur HaBli. But be'etzem mahusai, it's a union already of Gvul. And therefore, albeit the Klolos HaKav, which the Rebbe calls it here, is l'mayla mi'ak, it's beyond the whole concept of Ak, but since it's be'etzem, the Gilu at a Koyach HaGvul, how it's affected the Ur, and the Ur has become limited light, as you might say, be'etzem mahusai, and therefore the Esser spirits, the Atzilas, with their limitation, their Kelim and Oiros, but they're the idea of specific Gilu and specific limitation, they're also Adamel Elyoin, even Lagabi the Klolos HaKav, in other words, even Lagabi the Madrega the Kav, which is higher than Ak. Not just Lagabi Ak, but even Lagabi what he calls here the Klolos HaKav, due to the fact that we're going here, now later on, I don't know when I say later on, I mean it might be years before we get there, but another couple of Maimorim a little bit further ahead, that I was going to go with another shit in the Kav. There are two approaches to the Kav. But here we're going with the more simple approach to the Kav, that the Kav is BMS, by definition, the Indian of the Oyer, how it's become Mugbal through the Koyach HaTzimtzum, and it's become Mamish Oyer Gvuli, even though it's Shoyler is in the Oyer Shalifnei HaTzimtzum. And that we're going to have to deal with, because that's almost like a paradox. If you come from something which is bleakvul, then how can you become Gvuli? What made you be emes, the Indian from Gvul? We'll maybe have to wrestle with that one as we go along, but suffice it to say that that's how it is Lepoyo for the moment. And afar, we say that the Esser spheres, Dachilas, are Adamel Elyoin, Lekabi, the Klolos HaKav. However, later on, the Rebbe is going to say that we can understand the Kav maybe differently, and that's going to lead us to a different view of what it means that Atzilus is Adamel Elyoin, Al Chabonim, in that regard, as regards the Kav. As regards to Ak, it will still remain the case. However, that's the Indian of Atzilus, how it is Gilui HaHelem and Adameh LeElyoin. And we saw that we had immediately on that a question, and we said that it's written in Iyov, it's written a Pasik, V'chochma me'ayin timotzei, the beginning of Olam HaAtzilus, the first sphere in all the Esser spheres, which is Spheres HaChochma, well, that came about from the ayin. It came about from a level in a way of timotzei. What timotzei means, matzia, something that you find without knowing where it came from. But that's the Indian of Yesh Mi Ayin. That's what the indicator of this other concept of Yesh Mi Ayin. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. We just said that Atzilus is Adameh Le'Elyoin in the sense that it's only Gilui HaHilem, and therefore it can be compared to the higher Madrigas because it comes only B'derech Gilui HaHilem. But if I say that Chochmah is really Me'ayin Timotzei, then that tends to indicate that Atzilus came about Yesh Me'ayin and not Gilui HaHilem. And so therefore how does that fit in? Nisbu Aliyel, the Rebbe began to explain that by saying it's already been explained about. The Mash Atzilus hu Adameh Le'Elyoin. Whatever we say that Atzilus is only Gilui HaHilem. Therefore it can be compared to the higher Madrigas. It's Adameh Le'Elyoin. Ainu Legabi Ak. That's only Legabi, as we said, the Olam, which is the first Olam. V'gam Legabi Klolos HaKav. Also Legabi, the generality of the Kav, meaning the Indian of the Kav out's even higher than Ak, as we just pointed out. Ki. Now why can we say that? Ki Beis Mini Amshochas Yesh. There are two forms of derivation of Elikus. Aleph, B'Pchinas Gvul Umida. This is how the Eibishter is able to give forth from himself Hamshocha, a derivation and a revelation, which is in from Gvul and measurement, literally. Gvul, limitation, and middle measurement. V'hainu Gilui HaKav. That means, and as we pointed out, that here we're going with that approach, that the Kav in its very essence, from the very first moment of its revelation, the Kav is limited light. It's the Indian of limitation, and therefore it'll be the first appearance of limitation after the Tzimtzum, because prior to the Tzimtzum everything was unlimited. Everything was only the simple, unlimited light prior to the Tzimtzum. So therefore said the Rebbe, the Indian of the first Oifen of Gilui Elikus, which is Gvul Umida, we can say that that's the Kav. And therefore, we saw that the Klolos HaKav, even the Kav at its very first moment of Gilui, even prior to Ak, then it's completely Midah Ugvul. The base of the second form of derivation of Elikus is B'Pchinas Ein Tzei. The Indian for Elikus, how it is unlimited, absolutely unlimited, Ein Tzei. Shazo HaOres B'Pchinas Malchus Ein Tzei. What that is, the revelation, or the how do you call it, the luminescence in the form of Gilui of what we call Malchus Ta'ein Tzev. Now this expression, Malchus Ta'ein Tzev, is a lashon from the Kisvei Arizal, and we need to sort of define it a little bit carefully, even though it's slightly tricky, but it doesn't really need to be as tricky as it sounds. When you say Malchus Ta'ein Tzev, l'chora, you're using two terms which tend to contradict one another, because Malchus indicates a sphere or a limitation, a specific entity, and Ein Tzev indicates something which is completely unlimited. So how can you have Malchus Ta'ein Tzev? So it's put down in the Kisvei Arizal that even in the Oyer which preceded the Tzimtzum, the first is galus of light from the Atzmus himself. What that was the the simple light that filled up the whole so-called hollow. There was no room for anything, as you might say. And the Tzimtzum revealed the hollow. Well, that light also had in itself certain gradations. And Chassidus talks about it at great length, as a famous Maimon from the Alter Rebbe, and also in the Kutei Torah and in other places. Chassidus says that nonetheless there were like gradations in that unlimited light. It wasn't just purely and utterly one Madrega. And therefore the Arizal says himself in a certain place in the Eitz Chaim, he says that when we say Malchus Ta'ein Tzev, he uses the expression Kilu Noima, as if we're saying like a Madrega Achroina in the Ein Tzev. In other words, that there was like a gradation within the Oyer Ein Sof, that it wasn't on the same high level as it was in the first appearance from the Atzmas. So how can you talk about levels in something which is absolutely unlimited, an Ein Sof? So the truth of the matter is that you can. You can talk about possibility of levels. The only thing is that those levels won't really have any yachas one to the other, because each one of them will be absolutely unlimited. And so therefore, we can say certain gradations within that Oyer, but we have to say that they don't have the normal understanding of spheres or limitations, and therefore yachas one to the other. No, each one is another form of the intimate, the infinite. In other words, that the infinite, being as he is, all-powerful, how they call it, omnipotent, he can reveal himself in different oifanim, and therefore the Eibishter revealed himself in an oifan of what we call malchus. In other words, he made the light in such a way that the tzimtzum would be able to affect it. Because the tzimtzum being an infinite gvul, how can it possibly affect something which is believable? If you look in Tanya, Perik Memches, we learned not all that long ago in the Chittas, the Alter Rebbe says that something which is believable compared to something which is gvul, ein leze kol erech or yachas klal. And therefore he uses the expression over there that something which you will count. You can count billions and trillions of it. You can count in the highest possible way that you can imagine number, but if you compare that with something which is beyond number altogether, then it's like one. It's like absolute nothing. Doesn't matter how many trillions of it you counted. It can be bligvul, ein leze kol erech klal. So therefore, how can you say that in the divine light, which was absolutely unlimited and infinite, and it was bligvul and ein sof, with the whole shlemus of that understanding, and all of a sudden there came along a koyach gvuli and was nimshach from it? How can that happen? Or what happened? How can you limit it if it's unlimited? What is the Pirush percent? So he can say, well, the Eibush is unlimited, and just like he can produce something which is bligvul, then he can also limit the bligvul. In other words, we'll say that was a gilui of the omnipotence of Hashem, and he used his omnipotence and he limited it. So, ultimately we have to say that. But it's well known that everything that the Eibishter made in all these madregas, even in the madregas Aki Elyonos, he made it be'ezeshu oifen that ultimately man would be able to appreciate how that could happen. In other words, that even though the Eibishter did things which are only mitzad his omnipotence, he did them in such a way that be'ezeshu derech, the mensch would be able to appreciate, oh yes, I can understand how that happened, even though it might demand a tremendous effort on his part to understand that, or at least he'll be able to say that he can understand Shador Kazek Kara. And that's what we find that Koheles, Shlomo HaMelech says in a pasuk, he said, "V'gam es ha'olam nosan b'libo." Everything which happens, the whole Yisavos, beginning from the Atzmas Ein Sof all the way down to this world, it's all put into the heart of the mensch. In other words, that the Eibishter did it all in Azar, even that ultimately the mensch would be able to have some understanding in his limited knowledge, how could this happen? And you can't just come along and say to the mensch, oh, it's all going to even for omnipotence, because then the mensch has no picture of how could it really happen. All he knows is that this happens, and therefore he has no relativity to the whole thing. And the amazing thing is that the Eibishter wanted that we should go back through all these madregas, right, back to Atzmas Ein Sof, understanding, as it were, our way. The Eibishter wanted that we should appreciate everything he did. And therefore, on that basis, the Oyer Ein Sof, which is Bilti Gvul, undergoes certain, almost what you might call tzimtzumim in itself, which are not tzimtzumim in a simple sense, but they're gradations downward that don't alter the actual Ein Sof, but they make it possible that the that the Koyach HaGvul will be able to appear and affect that light. And that's what we call Malchus the Ein Sof. That's what we mean by saying Malchus the Ein Sof. But in that Gufa, the Malchus is only one aspect of it. The Ikka is the Ein Sof.